In a quiet Montana valley, a single-dad Marine opens his roadhouse to two weary sisters on motorcycles, unaware that a storm of engines is already on the horizon. By dawn, 200 leather-clad lady bikers roar into his parking lot, drawn by a single act of courage that defied prejudice and awakened an entire community. What began as one night of simple kindness turns into a breathtaking tale of solidarity, second chances, and the power of a heart that refuses to back down. The last streaks of sunset flared like copper fire across the Montana sky as Caleb Brooks turned the key to the old coffee grinder. The familiar whirring hum filled the quiet of Copper Roadhouse, his weathered roadside diner that had once throbbed with travelers and truckers. Tonight, it sounded almost lonely. He wiped a long hand across the counter and paused, listening to the silence beyond the glass door. Only the faint hiss of the coffee pot and the soft scrape of a chair being dragged across the wood floor broke the stillness. From the kitchen came the scent of cooling apple pie and fresh cornbread, comforting aromas that once meant steady business. Now they felt almost ironic. Caleb glanced at the wall clock, 8:40 p.m. A slow night. Too slow. Dada. The small, clear voice belonged to Bella, his 8-year-old daughter, who peeked from behind the kitchen door with a towel still in her hands. Her long, honey-brown hair was tied back in a lopsided ponytail, and flour dusted her sweater like snow. "Yes, sweetheart," Caleb tried to sound light. "I finished stacking the pie boxes." "Do you think we'll get more customers?" Caleb's chest tightened. She asked every evening, hoping for a rush that never came. He looked at the empty parking lot beyond the big windows, just one dim streetlight reflected on wet pavement. "Maybe a late trucker," he said, forcing a smile. "But either way, we did good work today." Bella came closer, climbing onto the stool beside him. "Mom would like the pies tonight," she said softly. Caleb swallowed. Claire, his late wife, had loved autumn baking. She died 3 winters ago in a flash flood rescue attempt, leaving Caleb both mother and father. He kept her photograph near the register, Claire holding a laughing Bella at a county fair, sunlight in her hair. "You're right," he murmured, brushing a strand of hair from Bella's cheek. She'd say the pies look perfect. But behind his steady voice ran an undercurrent of worry. On the desk in the office, an envelope stamped "Final Notice" waited like a verdict. The bank's warning about missed mortgage payments. The heating system's repair estimate lay next to it, another cruel number. Caleb had served 2 tours as a Marine and thought he knew pressure, but this quiet siege Bill's slow nights and a little girl depending on him felt heavier than a battlefield pack. He pushed the thought aside and focused on closing duties, sweeping the floor, refilling napkin holders, wiping the old copper-edged tables. Each sound echoed in the near-empty diner. Outside, the wind carried a faint smell of pine and the far-off murmur of engines on Highway 93. The road itself was almost invisible in the gathering dark, but Caleb knew every bend. Years ago, when the Copper Roadhouse had belonged to his father, bikers and travelers filled these booths at all hours. Now, big chain truck stops had stolen most of the traffic. Bella hopped down from the stool. "Can I lock the side door?" "Sure, but stay inside the porch." "Light," Caleb said automatically, his Marine reflex always alert. She saluted with a grin and dashed off. Caleb watched the small silhouette disappear toward the side entrance. He felt a swell of pride. Bella had inherited her mother's fearless streak. The bell over the main door jingled suddenly. Caleb straightened. Few customers arrived this late, and he hadn't heard a vehicle pull up. The door swung inward with a cold gust, carrying the scent of wet asphalt and long roads. 2 figures stepped inside, women in full riding leathers, helmets tucked under their arms. The first was tall and lean, a streak of silver running through her dark braid. The second, slightly shorter, had a scar at her jawline that caught the light like a fine thread. For a beat, nobody spoke. Their boots left small pools on the worn pine floor. Both women's eyes scanned the room with sharp caution, then softened slightly when they saw only Caleb behind the counter and Bella emerging from the side hall. "Evening," Caleb said, his voice steady and welcoming. Years of Marine service had trained him to read a room quickly. These two carried the posture of people used to long rides, and maybe trouble, but not aggression. "Evening," the taller woman replied, her voice low and husky. "Kitchen still open, always is for travelers," Caleb said. "Coffee's hot. Sit wherever you like." They exchanged a glance, then chose a corner booth near the window, setting their helmets carefully on the seat. Bella's eyes widened with curiosity. She loved stories of the road, and she whispered, "They look like they came from a storm." Caleb smiled faintly and brought over menus and steaming mugs of coffee. "Long ride tonight?" he asked. The shorter woman, her eyes an arresting blue, answered after a pause, "Too long. We've been chasing someone. Family." Roads got messy. Her companion added, "Name's Tara Knox. My sister Bree. Appreciate the hospitality. Caleb Brooks. And this is Bella," he said. Bella offered a shy wave, then slid into the booth beside them, as if drawn by some quiet magnet. Soon the three were talking about mountain passes and sudden rain, about favorite pie flavors. Tara and Bree's voices softened as they spoke of their missing younger brother, a mechanic who hadn't checked in after last week's storm. Caleb listened carefully, sensing the weariness beneath their matter-of-fact tone. He poured more coffee, feeling an unexpected kinship. Years of service had taught him how loneliness clings during long nights on the road. Outside, a truck roared past, spraying water across the empty lot. The neon sign above the door flickered, and then another sound, the growl of engines closer this time. Not one or two, but several approaching fast. Caleb's instincts sharpened. He caught Tara's quick glance toward the window. Bree's hand rested lightly on the table, fingers tense. Headlights flared through the glass as 3 county patrol cars swung into the lot, tires hissing on wet gravel. The diner's warm quiet snapped like a wire. Bella looked up, puzzled. Caleb's pulse steadied to the calm rhythm of a Marine under pressure. The door opened again. Cold air and the heavy step of boots filled the room. Captain Trent Mason, broad-shouldered and known for his suspicion of bikers, strode in with 2 deputies. His eyes narrowed when he saw the sisters. "Well," he said, voice carrying like a challenge. "Looks like the Knox twins finally rolled into our town." The tension inside Copper Roadhouse deepened thick as the storm clouds gathering outside. Caleb shifted slightly, placing himself between the newcomers and his daughter, without making it obvious. He didn't know what the next hour would bring, but one truth burned steady in his chest. No one would be disrespected in his house. A heavy stillness wrapped the Copper Roadhouse as the door swung shut behind Captain Trent Mason and his deputies. For a moment, the only sound was the faint ticking of the wall clock, marking each second like a drumbeat. Caleb Brooks kept his stance calm, but alert shoulders squared as he turned toward the uniformed men. Years of Marine service had drilled that composure into his bones. He wouldn't let his daughter see fear. "Evening," Captain Caleb said evenly. "Coffee's fresh. You here for a meal?" Trent Mason's eyes, hard and narrow, slid past Caleb to the corner booth, where Tara and Bree Knox sat quietly. Rainwater gleamed on their black riding leathers. He didn't answer Caleb's question. Instead, he tilted his chin toward the sisters. "Evening. You two been on quite a ride, haven't you?" Bree met his gaze first. "We've been on the road for days, looking for our brother." "That a problem?" Her tone was steady, not sharp, but a spark of defiance glimmered in her ice-blue eyes. "A missing brother," Trent repeated, as if testing the words. "Funny, I heard something different. Got a bulletin about a pair of riders matching your description tied to a rough gathering downstate." Tara leaned forward, resting her forearms on the table. "Captain, We haven't done a thing except ride and search. Maybe your bulletin's wrong." The two deputies spread slightly to either side of the booth, a subtle pincer movement. Caleb noticed and stepped forward, planting himself near the edge of the counter. Bella, sensing the shift, slipped behind the register where she could see her father, but stay out of direct sight. "I don't see any disturbance here," Caleb said, his voice calm but carrying authority. "They're customers like anyone else." Trent gave a thin smile that didn't reach his eyes. Customers don't usually roll in after dark, with Hell's Angels support patches on their jackets. Tara exhaled slowly. "The patch belonged to our late father. It's a memorial, not a membership card. We ride for family, not for a club." A flicker of uncertainty crossed one deputy's face, but Trent's jaw only tightened. He rested a hand on the back of a chair, his posture a challenge. "Then you won't mind if we check IDs and run the plates." Bree's hand tightened around her coffee mug, knuckles pale. Caleb caught the movement and stepped closer to the booth. "Captain," he said, his voice low, but unmistakably firm. "Unless you have a warrant or probable cause, you don't need their IDs. This is a private establishment. I served this country to protect those rights, and I intend to honor them here." The room felt smaller, as if the walls themselves leaned in to listen. For several heartbeats, no one spoke. Outside, rain hissed against the neon sign. Finally, Trent straightened his boots, scraping on the wood floor. "You're making a mistake, Brooks. Folks around here remember who sides with trouble." Caleb held his gaze. "I side with fairness. That's what folks will remember." The silence stretched until one deputy cleared his throat. "Cap, maybe we should." Trent cut him off with a raised hand. He gave the sisters a final cold look, then jerked his chin toward the door. "Let's move." Without another word, the officers turned and left the bell above the door, jangling sharply in their wake. Only after the patrol cars pulled out of the lot did Caleb release the breath he'd been holding. He looked back at the sisters. Tara's shoulders had eased, but Bree still watched the window, as if expecting the officers to return. "Thank you," Tara said quietly. Not many people would stand up like that. Caleb shrugged, though his pulse was still steady from the confrontation. No one should be harassed for what they wear. "You're welcome here." Bella emerged from behind the register and climbed onto a stool wide-eyed. "They were mean," she said softly. Caleb reached over and squeezed her hand. "Sometimes people act out of fear. Honey, doesn't mean we respond with the same." The tension in the diner gradually softened. The sisters exchanged a glance, something unspoken passing between them. Then Bree managed a small, weary smile. "We really have been searching for our brother," she explained. "His name's Tyler. He left Wyoming last week to help a friend near the Bitterroot Mountains and never called back. Last we heard, a storm washed out part of the highway he would have taken." Tara added, "We checked hospitals and shelters along the route. Nothing. Every mile we ride feels longer." Her voice wavered for the first time. Bella leaned forward, curiosity overcoming shyness. "Does he ride a big motorcycle like yours?" Bree nodded. "A vintage Harley. He rebuilt it himself." "That sounds awesome," Bella said, and the faint excitement in her tone made Tara smile despite the worry. Caleb refilled their coffee and set a plate of warm cornbread on the table. "Eat," he said gently. "It's on the house. You need fuel to keep searching." They hesitated, then accepted. The smell of butter and honey slowly filled the room, blending with the low hum of the neon light. As they ate, conversation began to flow more naturally. Bree asked about the Roadhouse's history. Caleb told them how his father had opened it decades earlier, when the highway was young and busy. He spoke of Claire, his late wife, with a soft reverence, and of the long road he and Bella had traveled since. Tara listened closely, her dark eyes reflecting both respect and quiet understanding. "You've kept this place alive through some hard winters," she said. "That takes grit." Caleb gave a modest shrug. Some days it feels like just stubbornness. Bree shook her head. It's heart. There's a difference. Their words warmed the room more than the coffee. For the first time in weeks, Caleb felt the weight on his chest ease just a little. Maybe it was the company of fellow travelers who understood long roads and quiet endurance. Maybe it was the simple fact of being seen. Outside, the rain finally eased, leaving the parking lot slick and shining under the streetlight. A solitary semi-truck rumbled past, its taillights fading like embers into the dark. Tara checked her phone and sighed. No new messages. We'll head out again at first light. Caleb considered the fatigue in their faces, the way Bree's eyelids drooped between sips of coffee. You don't have to ride tonight, he said. I've got a spare room in back, 2 beds, clean linens. You can rest here, no charge. The sisters exchanged a surprised look. We don't want to impose, Bree said. It's no imposition, Caleb replied firmly. It's what neighbors do, even if we met only an hour ago. Something softened in Tara's expression. You're sure I'm sure? After a quiet pause, they agreed. Caleb fetched extra blankets, while Bella eagerly showed them the small hallway leading to the guest room. The simple space smelled of cedar and fresh laundry, a safe harbor after days of cold miles. Later, when the Roadhouse finally settled into silence, Caleb stood alone at the counter drying a mug. Through the window, he could see the faint glow of the sisters' motorcycles under the porch light. The storm clouds had broken apart, revealing a scatter of stars. He thought of the look in Tara's eyes when she spoke of family, of Bree's quick defense of her sister, of the dignity they carried, despite suspicion and fatigue. Something about them resonated deep inside, stirring memories of his own Marine brothers and the unspoken vows of loyalty they once shared. Bella padded back from the guest hallway and leaned against him. They'll find their brother, she said with quiet certainty. Caleb wrapped an arm around her small shoulders. I hope so, sweetheart. And until then, we'll make sure they have a safe place to start again. Father and daughter stood together at the window, watching the night sky clear. They didn't yet know that this simple act of hospitality, this choice to stand firm and to open their door, would ripple far beyond one quiet roadhouse. Somewhere out there, hundreds of engines were already cooling from a day's ride, ready to roar to life at dawn. And those engines would carry more than chrome and leather. They would carry the echo of a single Marine's quiet courage. The first gray of dawn seeped through the thin curtains of copper Roadhouse, softening the neon glow that had burned all night above the entrance. Caleb Brooks woke early, as he always did, his inner clock still wired to Marine discipline. For a few moments, he simply listened, the hum of the refrigerator, the slow drip of a leaky faucet, the steady breathing of his daughter in the next room. Then he heard another sound, 2 sets of footsteps, moving quietly down the hallway. Tara and Bree Knox. Caleb stepped into the main dining room, rubbing the sleep from his eyes. The sisters stood near the coffee counter, their black jackets hanging open faces, pale with fatigue, but somehow sharper in the morning light. They looked like travelers about to set out for another long and uncertain ride. Morning. Caleb greeted softly, careful not to wake Bella just yet. Morning, Tara replied with a small nod. We didn't mean to wake anyone. We thought we'd get back on the road early. You didn't wake me, Caleb said, heading for the old percolator. Coffee's almost ready. Sit down for a bit. It's a long day ahead. Bree hesitated, then slid into a booth. Tara followed her eyes, scanning the empty parking lot through the large window. The sky outside was streaked with thin, low clouds, still heavy from the night's rain. Caleb brought over steaming mugs. Any news about your brother? Tara shook her head. No. We'll keep riding west. Maybe try a different hospital list. Caleb studied their tired faces and thought of the long highways, the cold miles waiting. You'll find him, he said, with quiet certainty. Sometimes roads only open when the timing's right. They drank in silence for a few minutes. Then Bree glanced at Caleb, her voice tentative. About last night. We've had worse, but it doesn't get easier. Caleb set down his cup. The way Captain Mason came in, that was beyond routine. I'm sorry you had to deal with that here. You didn't have to step in, Tara said. But you did. Why, he thought for a moment. Because it was wrong. I served with men and women from every walk of life. We wore the same uniform, shared the same risks. You learn quickly not to judge people by a patch on their jacket. A flicker of gratitude passed between the sisters. Bree exhaled, shoulders loosening. Most folks don't see it that way. Most folks haven't stood in a combat zone, Caleb answered quietly. The kitchen door creaked open, and Bella emerged, hair tousled still in her flannel pajamas. She brightened when she saw the sisters. You're still here, Tara smiled. For a little while. Your dad makes strong coffee. Hard to leave without a second cup. Bella giggled and climbed into the booth beside Bree. Do you really ride for hours without stopping? That's like 100 playground laps. Bree laughed, a clear sound that cut through the morning hush. Feels like 1,000 some days. For a few precious minutes, the diner filled with soft conversation and the smell of fresh coffee and buttered toast. It could almost have been an ordinary morning until the crunch of tires on gravel shattered the calm. Caleb's head snapped toward the window. A familiar patrol car rolled into the lot, headlights slicing the dawn. His jaw tightened. Captain Trent Mason. Tara and Bree exchanged a look instinctively, straightening in their seats. Caleb rose and moved to the door just as Mason stepped inside. The officer's boots left wet prints on the floor, and his expression was even harder than the night before. 2 deputies followed. Morn and Brooks. Mason said, though the word held no warmth. Still hosting your new friends, I see. Caleb kept his voice level. They stayed the night because the storm made riding dangerous. There's no law against hospitality. Mason's eyes flicked toward the sisters. Funny thing he said. Sheriff's office got a call about 2 riders linked to a theft outside Hamilton. Description's close enough to make me curious. That's a lie, Bree said before she could stop herself. Her hands clenched around her coffee mug. Tara's gaze was steady. We were here the entire night. Ask anyone in this diner, including a little girl who was asleep in the next room. Mason ignored her protest. I need to see identification and registration for those bikes. Caleb stepped forward, every inch of him marine steel. Captain, you have no probable cause. You know it and I know it. If you want to talk theft, bring a warrant or bring proof. Until then, this is private property, and you're crossing a line. Mason's jaw worked as if chewing a bitter seed. Don't push me, Brooks. You might have worn a uniform, but that doesn't put you above local law. Caleb's tone stayed calm but carried weight. I'm not above the law. I'm standing on it. 4th Amendment. Captain Unreasonable Searches and Seizures. My father taught me that long before I wore any uniform. For a long moment, no one moved. Bella held her breath beside Bree. The deputies shifted uncomfortably. Even the old clock seemed to hesitate. Finally, Mason exhaled a sharp huff of frustration. You think a fancy quote from the Constitution keeps trouble out of this town? Folks remember who invites it in. Maybe, Caleb said evenly. But they also remember who tries to bully their neighbors. Something in his steady gaze, cool and unwavering, made Mason blink first. He turned on his heel. Come on, he barked to the deputies. The 3 of them stomped out the bell over the door, jangling like a warning shot. When the patrol car's engine finally faded down the highway, the diner exhaled as one. Bella darted to her father and hugged his waist. Tara and Bree looked at each other with a mixture of relief and disbelief. You just stared him down, Bree said, awe softening her voice. Caleb rested a hand on Bella's back. I didn't do anything heroic. I just wouldn't let someone trample over decency." Tara studied him for a long moment. Most people wouldn't have risked it, especially not in a small town where the captain can make life difficult. Caleb gave a half smile. Maybe. But some lines have to stay in the sand. If we erase them, we lose more than we save. The sisters fell silent, their eyes reflecting a deep understanding. It wasn't just about last night or this morning. It was about every time they'd been judged by their leather jackets and patches instead of their hearts. Bella tugged at Tara's sleeve. "Does this mean you'll stay a little longer?" she asked hopefully. Tara exchanged a glance with Bree, a silent conversation passing between them. "Maybe a little longer," she said at last. "At least until the road's dry." A tentative peace settled back over the roadhouse. Outside, the clouds began to thin, revealing a pale blue sky. Yet Caleb knew this was only the beginning. He could feel it like the low rumble of distant thunder. Last night's confrontation had set something in motion. He didn't know that somewhere, miles away, phones were buzzing and engines were warming. Calls made to sisters in arms and friends who rode not for clubs, but for loyalty. By nightfall, the quiet copper-colored diner at the edge of the highway would become the center of something far larger than any of them imagined. For now, Caleb simply poured more coffee, the rich aroma filling the room like a promise. He glanced at Bella, who had returned to her seat beside the sisters, chattering about pies and school projects. The sight stirred a quiet resolve in him. Whatever came next, be it more visits from Captain Mason or something even bigger, he knew he would stand his ground. This roadhouse was more than a building. It was his family's heartbeat, the place where kindness drew its own circle of protection. And he would defend it just as he had defended his country. The rain stopped by late afternoon, leaving the Montana air cool and sharp, washed clean of the previous night's tension. Copper Roadhouse glowed beneath the soft light of a half moon, its neon sign humming faintly against a sky stitched with stars. Inside, the warmth of simmering chili and fresh cornbread lingered, though the dining room remained mostly quiet. Caleb Brooks wiped down the counter for the third time, his mind still replaying the morning's confrontation with Captain Trent Mason. Years of Marine service had taught him how to stand firm under pressure, but the encounter had left a heavy residue. Trent's parting words. "Folks remember who invites trouble" echoed in his ears like a stubborn refrain. He paused to listen. From the small back room came Bella's cheerful chatter as she showed Tara and Bree Knox her sketchbook of horses and sunsets. The sisters had stayed partly because the roads west were still slick, partly because they sensed their sudden departure might invite more scrutiny. Caleb was quietly glad they hadn't left. Something about their presence filled the roadhouse with a long-missing pulse. Bella bounded into the main room, cheeks flushed with excitement. "Dad, Bree plays guitar." She showed me pictures of her bike with music stickers all over it. Bree followed, grinning, as she carried an old acoustic guitar she'd retrieved from her saddlebag. "I keep it for long stops," she said. "It keeps me sane when miles start to blend together." Tara came behind her dark braid loose over one shoulder. Bella insisted on a song, she said, with a hint of amusement. Caleb's eyebrows rose. "A concert, huh?" "Well, we can't deny our star audience." Bree sat on a stool near the counter, adjusting the tuning pegs with a practiced hand. When she strummed the first soft chords of an old country ballad, the roadhouse seemed to exhale. Notes floated through the rafters, mingling with the faint scent of coffee and the glow of amber lights. Bella swayed gently to the rhythm, her eyes shining. Tara leaned against the counter, arms folded, a small smile breaking through her usual watchful expression. Caleb stood behind them, letting the music seep into the quiet corners of his mind. He hadn't realized how much he'd missed live music, how deeply it could soften a room. When the last chord faded, Bella clapped enthusiastically. That was beautiful. Mom would have loved it. Caleb felt the familiar pang at the mention of Claire, but let the warmth of the moment take root. She would have, he agreed softly. The sisters exchanged a glance that held more than polite sympathy. Tara spoke first. You've built something special here. Not many people open their door to strangers after what we've seen today. Caleb shrugged. Out here, you learn to help when you can. Roads get lonely. Storms don't care about reputation. Bree set the guitar aside and looked at him steadily. Still, it takes courage to stand up to someone like Mason. That wasn't just hospitality. That was a line you drew. Caleb met her gaze. Sometimes you draw lines, so your child knows where they are. Bella needs to see that right matters more than fear. Bella beamed at him, and for a heartbeat, the Roadhouse felt like a sanctuary, untouched by the world's suspicion. But the world had a way of reminding them it was still out there. A low rumble of thunder rolled across the mountains, and a fresh gust of wind rattled the windows. Caleb checked the weather radio on the counter. A new advisory warned of dropping temperatures and the chance of black ice before morning. Tara frowned. Riding west tonight isn't safe. We'd better stay put. You're welcome as long as you need, Caleb said without hesitation. There's a second guest room if you'd rather not double up. The sisters started to protest, but Caleb cut in with a quiet firmness that brooked no argument. It's settled. No one rides out on black ice. They finally nodded, gratitude flickering in their eyes. As the evening deepened, Caleb prepared a late meal, thick chili with cornbread and honey butter. Bella set the table with the seriousness of a young hostess. The four of them ate together, conversation flowing like an unexpected river, stories of childhood misadventures, favorite back road diners, the strange beauty of midnight highways. Bree described her years playing guitar in small-town bars to pay for nursing school. Tara talked about working as a mechanic and how bikes gave her a sense of freedom no city job could match. Their lives had been hard and unsteady, yet every detail revealed a resilience Caleb recognized and respected. When Bella excused herself to fetch a bedtime book, Tara's voice softened. Your daughter's incredible. So open-hearted. She's the best part of me, Caleb said, a quiet truth he rarely voiced. Claire, my late wife, had that same fearless kindness. Bree leaned forward, resting her elbows on the table. I think Claire would be proud of the way you protect this place, and of how you protected us today. Caleb looked down at his hands. I just try to do what's right. The Marine Corps taught me tactics. Claire taught me heart. Maybe together they amount to something. Silence settled comfortable and deep. Outside, the wind carried a distant rhythmic thrum, like the echo of engines far off in the dark. None of them noticed it yet, but that faint sound marked the beginning of a larger story already set in motion. Bella returned with a book of local legends and asked Tara to read the first tale aloud. Tara obliged, her low voice threading through the room, while Bree's gentle guitar chords formed a soft undercurrent. Caleb watched his daughter's eyelids grow heavy, her head eventually resting on Tara's shoulder as the story wound down. It was close to midnight when Caleb carried Bella to her room and tucked her in. When he returned, he found the sisters washing dishes, despite his protests. You've done enough, he said. Guests don't clean. We're not guests anymore, Bree replied, smiling faintly. Tonight we're family on the road. The simple words struck Caleb with unexpected force. Family on the road. He thought of the quiet brotherhood he'd once felt in the Marines, the bond that outlasted distance and time. Something similar was taking root here, forged not by shared battles, but by shared decency. When the dishes were done, Tara and Bree prepared to retire to the guest room. Tara paused at the hallway entrance. Caleb, she said softly, thank you. Not just for the room or the meal, for seeing us as people when others only saw a patch on a jacket. He met her gaze, steady and warm. The road is long enough without adding loneliness. Anyone who walks through that door deserves respect. That's the rule here. A small smile curved Tara's lips. It's a rare rule. I hope it spreads. Caleb watched them disappear down the hallway, the quiet of the roadhouse folding around him again. He turned off the main lights, leaving only the copper pendant lamps to glow like embers above the counter. Outside, the moonlight pooled on the wet asphalt, silvering the parked motorcycles. Somewhere far beyond the mountains, a network of friends and allies, the silent sisterhood of riders, was already stirring. Phones buzzed, engines warmed, maps unfolded. Caleb couldn't know that his simple decision to stand his ground and offer kindness would ripple outward through that vast hidden family. He only knew that tonight in this place, built by his parents and kept alive by stubborn love, strangers had become kin. And in a world quick to judge and slow to embrace, that was a victory worth every risk. Caleb locked the door and stood for a moment under the quiet neon glow. Tomorrow would bring whatever it would bring: patrol cars, questions, maybe more storms. But for now, Copper Roadhouse was at peace, its heartbeat strong. Morning sunlight spilled across the mountains in wide gold strokes, warming the wet gravel of Copper Roadhouse's parking lot. The storm had passed, leaving the world washed clean. But inside, Caleb Brooks felt a faint tension, like a guitar string pulled tight. Last night's peace lingered, yet he knew a challenge was coming. He rose before dawn as always, and found Tara and Bree Knox already awake. They sat at the counter with cups of coffee, speaking in low tones that fell silent when he entered. "Morning," Caleb greeted, setting a skillet on the stove. "How'd you sleep?" "Better than we have in days," Tara answered, her dark eyes soft but shadowed. Bree added, "Your place feels safe." Caleb nodded, warmed by the trust in their voices. "Glad to hear it. Breakfast will be ready soon." Bella soon patted in her hair, a sunlit mess, and began setting the table. They shared scrambled eggs and buttered toast, easy laughter weaving between bites. For a brief moment, the Roadhouse felt like a family kitchen, not just a roadside diner clinging to survival. But as the sisters prepared to head out to check a nearby clinic for news of their missing brother, a sharp tap sounded at the front door. Caleb crossed the room and found a sheet of paper taped to the glass. Bold, angry red letters shouted back at him. "Closed until further notice. No biker lovers." His stomach clenched. The handwriting was rough, jagged, unmistakably meant to intimidate. Someone had slipped onto the porch during the night and posted the sign like a brand. Bella came up beside him, reading aloud before he could stop her. "What does that mean, Dad?" Caleb tore the sign down in one swift motion, folding it in half until the words disappeared. "It means someone thinks they can scare us," he said calmly, though a slow burn of anger lit his chest. "But they can't." Bree stepped forward, fists clenched. "This is about us. We brought trouble to your door." "No," Caleb said firmly. "The trouble belongs to whoever believes kindness deserves punishment." Tara's eyes darkened. "Still, we can't let them drag you into our fight. Maybe we should ride on." "You're not dragging me anywhere," Caleb replied. "This is my roadhouse. I decide who's welcome. And you are." Bella slipped her small hand into Bree's. "I want you to stay," she whispered. The sisters exchanged a glance, half gratitude, half sorrow. They understood the risk of their presence, but also the power of standing together. By mid-morning, word of the sign had spread through the small town of 3 Pines. The usual breakfast crowd thinned to almost nothing. Only Mrs. Callahan, an elderly neighbor, with a fondness for Bella's apple pie, arrived with her quiet husband, ordering their meal and offering a gentle squeeze of Caleb's arm. "This will blow over," she said kindly. "Decent folks know your heart." Caleb thanked her, but worry gnawed. A diner couldn't survive on 2 loyal customers a day. Late morning brought a call from the produce supplier. The young driver sounded apologetic. "Sorry, Mr. Brooks. We, have to delay your order. Something about police instructions on biker safety, just for a day or 2. Caleb knew a polite excuse when he heard one. Captain Trent Mason had decided to tighten the screws. He hung up, jaw clenched. A flash of his Marine years returned, moments when supply lines collapsed under enemy pressure. But this was no combat zone. This was home. By noon, the Roadhouse sat eerily still. The coffee pot gurgled to itself while Bella colored pictures in the corner, and Tara and Bree quietly cleaned tables that didn't need cleaning. The emptiness rang louder than any argument. Finally, Caleb broke the silence. "I'm making stew for supper. We'll need to stretch ingredients until the next delivery, but we'll be fine." Bree looked up, worry plain. "Caleb, we can't let you take the hit for us. Maybe if we leave, you leaving won't change the mind of a bully," Caleb said, voice steady but gentle. "Bullies test limits. The answer isn't retreat. It's resolve." Tara studied him with a mix of admiration and unease. "You sound like you're still in the Corps." "In some ways," he admitted. "But this isn't about war. It's about home. And home is worth defending." The sisters fell silent, moved by the quiet conviction behind his words. Afternoon light dimmed early clouds gathering again on the horizon. A few curious townsfolk slowed their cars as they passed, some offering tentative waves, others turning their heads. Caleb noticed, but refused to shrink. He kept the neon sign glowing and the coffee hot. Around 4 o'clock, the bell above the door jingled a sound so rare that day it startled them all. Dave Miller, a former rancher and old acquaintance of Caleb's, walked in with deliberate steps. He ordered a black coffee and sat at the counter. "I heard what happened," Dave said after a moment. "Lot of talk around town. Some folks think Mason overstepped. I wanted to say, I stand with you." The simple words carried the weight of quiet solidarity. Caleb felt a knot loosen in his chest. "Thanks, Dave. That means more than you know." Wordlessly, Tara poured Dave a second cup on the house. Bree offered a slice of cornbread. Small gestures, but in that moment, they felt like defiance wrapped in kindness. As dusk fell, the Roadhouse glowed like a warm ember against the encroaching dark. Inside, they shared supper, rich beef stew with thick bread, while Bella recited a poem she'd memorized from school about courage and kindness. Yet beneath the domestic calm, Caleb sensed the town's judgment, gathering like distant thunder. He had seen this pattern in far-off villages during deployments, first whispers, then subtle isolation, and finally open hostility. But he also knew that courage was contagious. One act of standing firm could ignite others. After closing, he sat alone at the counter while Tara and Bree tucked Bella into bed. He sorted through the day's receipts, meager compared to even the slowest Tuesday a month ago. His mind ran numbers, like a quiet drill-heating bill mortgage inventory. By the end of next week, if business stayed this slow, he might not make the payment. Still, as he looked around the Roadhouse, the copper-toned booths polished by years of memories, the framed photos of veterans and family, Caleb felt more resolve than despair. This place stands for something, he whispered to the empty room. It will not fall to fear. Tara returned to the counter with a pot of late-night coffee. She poured a cup and slid it toward him. "We know what this is costing you," she said softly. "Not just money. Reputation. Maybe friends." Caleb wrapped his hands around the warm mug. "Every cost is a choice. I'd rather lose dollars than lose decency." Bree joined them, her blue eyes shining with unshed tears. You barely know us. Why fight this hard?" He looked at them both, remembering his fellow Marines, men and women, who had risked everything for comrades they'd met only weeks earlier. "Because you needed someone to draw a line. And because someone once did that for me." Silence settled rich with understanding. Outside, a cold wind swept across the empty lot. Far off, almost beyond hearing, came the low, steady pulse of engines. On the highway, motorcycles traveling in loose formation. Caleb didn't notice. He was lost in thought. But the sound marked the first ripple of an approaching tide. Before turning in for the night, he checked the locks and dimmed the lights, leaving only the warm copper glow above the counter. He paused to look once more at the folded sign he had tossed into the trash earlier. Its red letters were now hidden beneath a layer of paper towels, as if already forgotten. But in Caleb's mind, it had become something else, a challenge answered. He switched off the final light and stood for a moment in the quiet. Tomorrow would bring its own trials, but he felt no fear. The line had been drawn. Whatever the cost, he would hold it. And far beyond the dark mountains, a silent army of riders, women of steel and leather, was already in motion, their engines carrying the message that kindness would not stand alone. The next morning broke clear and cold, the mountains sharpening against a sky the color of polished steel. Frost glittered on the edges of the copper Roadhouse sign, catching the first rays of sunlight like a silent promise of endurance. Inside, Caleb Brooks stirred the fire in the old wood stove until the flames roared, then filled the percolator with fresh water. The familiar hiss and pop of brewing coffee grounded him, but the memory of yesterday's empty dining room still pressed heavily on his mind. Bella padded in, wrapped in a flannel robe, rubbing the sleep from her eyes. "Morning, Dad," she murmured, leaning against him. "Morning, sunshine." He kissed the top of her head, breathing in the faint scent of her strawberry shampoo. For a moment, he let himself simply stand there, holding on to the quiet heartbeat of their little world. But quiet couldn't hide the reality. Business had dropped to almost nothing overnight. The folded sign with its ugly red letters. No biker lovers still lay in the trash, but its message lingered. Caleb knew the numbers by heart. One more week of receipts like yesterday, and the mortgage payment would be impossible. He poured Bella a cup of warm milk and took a long breath. "We'll be okay," he said softly, though he wasn't sure if he was reassuring her or himself. A gentle knock interrupted his thoughts. Tara and Bree Knox stepped into the kitchen from the hallway where they had spent the night. Their faces looked calmer than the day before, but an undercurrent of urgency still ran through their eyes. "Morning," Tara said, brushing a strand of dark hair from her forehead. "Need a hand with breakfast?" "You've already done more than enough," Caleb replied with a small smile. "But company's welcome." As they scrambled eggs and sliced bread together, Bree exchanged a glance with her sister. Something unspoken passed between them. Finally, Tara set down her knife and turned to Caleb. "We've been talking," she began, "about what happened yesterday, about Captain Mason, about everything." Caleb waited, sensing the weight in her voice. "You've done more than stand up for us," Bree said. "You opened your home, risked your business, and we can see the cost. Empty tables don't lie." Caleb shrugged, trying to ease their concern. "This place has weathered hard times before. We'll manage." Tara's gaze sharpened. "You shouldn't have to manage alone. We have friends, sisters on the road, people we trust with our lives. They need to know what you did for us." Caleb frowned slightly. "I didn't help you for a reward. We know," Bree said quickly. "That's why it matters. You didn't stand up for us because of who we are. You stood up because it was right. That's the kind of thing our community rallies around." Bella looked up from buttering toast. Like when Mom helped after the flood, Caleb's heart squeezed. Claire had once organized food and blankets For strangers stranded by a river that swallowed half the county. He remembered how neighbors from far towns came without being asked. Something like that, he said. Tara reached for her phone. There's a network of women writers. Some are teachers. Some run businesses. Some are veterans like you. We call each other family. When one of us is in trouble, word travels fast. We don't forget who protects our own. Caleb hesitated. He valued privacy and had never courted attention. But he also knew the power of comradeship. In the Marines, a radio call for help could bring a platoon charging over mountains before dawn. Perhaps this was not so different. If you're sure it's safe, he said finally. Tara's dark eyes met his. It's more than safe. It's who we are. She stepped to the corner booth with Bree and began sending messages. Caleb heard the soft tapping of keys and the occasional low murmur of biker slang that sounded like a code of honor. Bella wandered over curious, and soon Tara was showing her how to send a simple heart emoji to confirm each message. Outside, a thin winter sun climbed higher, glinting off the wet highway. By mid-morning, the Roadhouse had only a trickle of customers. Dave Miller stopped in for coffee, and conversation Mrs. Callahan for her usual slice of pie. Both noticed the quieter tables and offered quiet words of support. You just keep doing what you're doing, Dave said as he left. This town needs a reminder of what decency looks like. Their kindness lifted Caleb's spirits, but did little for the balance sheet. He spent part of the afternoon checking the furnace and reorganizing pantry shelves to stretch supplies. Each task was a small declaration. This place stands. Meanwhile, Tara and Bree worked their own kind of logistics. Between cups of coffee, they tapped at their phones, fielding replies from riders across the Northwest Oregon, Idaho, Washington, Wyoming. Caleb overheard fragments. She stood her ground. Protected us. A Marine with a roadhouse and a heart the size of the Rockies. By late afternoon, a faint current of anticipation ran through the room. Bree stepped outside several times to check her bike, returning with a look Caleb recognized from military days, someone quietly preparing for movement on a large scale. When Bella asked if their friends might visit, Tara smiled mysteriously. Maybe. Riders travel fast when the cause is right. As evening deepened, the three adults sat around the counter while Bella colored pictures of motorcycles and mountains. Outside the highway was strangely quiet, as if holding its breath. You really think others will come? Caleb asked at last. Bree met his gaze. We don't think. We know. The road has ears. When someone stands for fairness, word becomes a beacon. And when a beacon shines, riders answer. Tara leaned forward, her voice low but sure. It may take a day, maybe less, but they'll come. The certainty in their tone was like a spark in Caleb's chest. He had seen brotherhood in uniform, the kind that crossed deserts and oceans. Hearing that same fierce loyalty from these women, bound not by military orders, but by choice, stirred something deep and familiar. Night came early, painting the mountains in blue shadow. The Roadhouse closed its doors to a silent street, but inside a quiet determination burned brighter than the lamps. Caleb tucked Bella into bed with a story about explorers who never gave up, then returned to the counter where Tara and Bree still sipped coffee. You've both ridden through a lot, he said thoughtfully. What keeps you on the road? Bree answered first. Freedom. And knowing someone out there might need us, Tara added, and the family we found along the way. We've seen towns change just because a few people dared to be kind. Caleb looked around his diner, the copper trim glowing like banked embers. Maybe that's exactly what this place was built for. They talked late into the night, sharing stories of open highways and quiet acts of courage. A stranded farmer rescued in a snowstorm, a small-town kid sponsored for college by a biker rally. Each story reminded Caleb of the Marine creed he still carried, never leave anyone behind. When silence finally settled, Tara checked her phone one last time. A faint smile curved her lips. "The word is out," she said softly. "Chapters are already writing. From Spokane, from Bozeman, from all directions." Caleb felt a slow warmth spread through him, not triumph, but gratitude. The simple choice to offer coffee and respect had awakened something far bigger than his Roadhouse. As he turned off the lights, he stepped outside for a final look at the highway. The moon hung low and bright, casting silver over the empty road. For a moment, all was still. But in the far distance beyond, mountains and rivers, the echo of engines had already begun a deep, steady heartbeat rolling through the dark, carrying the promise of help and solidarity. He didn't know how many would come, or what tomorrow might bring. But he knew this kindness had spoken, and the road was answering. The first sound was so faint that Caleb Brooks thought he imagined it. A low, distant murmur like the faraway roll of thunder slipping into the half-dream of early morning. He turned over in bed and glanced at the clock, 47 a.m. Montana's pre-dawn darkness pressed against the window, a deep velvet blue scattered with icy stars. Then the murmur grew a long, deep vibration that seemed to hum through the walls of the copper roadhouse. Caleb's marine instincts sharpened instantly. He sat up, the quiet training of years, kicking an assess, locate, prepare. Beside his room down the hall, Bella shifted in her sleep unaware. From the guest rooms came a soft creak of floorboards. Tara and Bree Knox were awake too. He could feel it in the subtle hush of the building. Caleb dressed quickly, pulling on his worn marine green jacket. The air in the dining room felt electric when he stepped inside. The scent of last night's wood smoke lingered, and the copper-edged tables glowed dimly under a single overhead bulb. Through the front windows, the world was still dark, but the sound outside had deepened a rhythmic roar, dozens of engines blending into one rolling heartbeat. Tara emerged from the hallway, already zipped into her leather jacket, hair pulled back into a swift braid. Bree followed with a purposeful calm. They exchanged a quick glance with Caleb, no words needed. "You hear it too," Caleb said quietly. Tara's eyes gleamed. "They're coming." Bree stepped to the window, parting the curtain with a gloved hand. And not just a few. As if on cue, the first sweep of headlights crested the rise of Highway 93. Bright beams cut across the night, followed by another, then another. The rumble intensified until it filled the valley like an approaching storm. Caleb felt it vibrate in his chest. Bella's door opened, and the little girl padded in, still in her nightgown, rubbing her eyes. "Daddy, what's that sound?" Caleb crouched and gathered her close. "Friends on the road," he said softly. "Lots of them." Tara's phone buzzed with a single text. She glanced at the screen and smiled. "They made good time," she murmured. Within minutes, the horizon blazed with moving lights, first a handful of silhouettes, then a long, shimmering line that seemed to stretch forever. The roar of motorcycles wrapped around the roadhouse, a living ocean of chrome and steel. Caleb flipped on the porch lights and stepped outside with Bella on his hip. The pre-dawn air was sharp and clean, scented with pine and distant snow. Across the highway, the mountains stood like shadowed sentinels, while the procession of bikes thundered closer. 200 lady bikers, leather-clad women from every corner of the Northwest rolled in like a tide. Some wore patches from Spokane, others from Bozeman or Portland, or their headlights carved silver paths through the darkness as they filled the roadhouse lot and spilled into the vacant gravel field next door. Engines idled in perfect rhythm, their collective sound an anthem of solidarity. Bree exhaled a shaky laugh, half disbelief, half pride. 200, maybe more. Tara's voice was husky with emotion. Word travels fast when family calls. Caleb watched, stunned, and moved as the lead riders parked with disciplined precision. They dismounted, removing helmets to reveal faces of every age and background: grandmothers with silver braids, young mechanics with oil-stained bandanas, teachers and nurses, artists and veterans. Some wore heavy leathers, others denim vests stitched with years of road stories. Every one of them carried the quiet confidence of someone who knew the long miles and still chose to ride. The leader approached first, a tall woman with a streak of crimson hair and eyes that gleamed like polished steel. She extended a gloved hand to Caleb. "Name's Cassidy Hart, Spokane chapter," she said. "We heard what you did for our sisters." Caleb shook her hand firmly. "Welcome to Copper Roadhouse. I'm Caleb Brooks, and this is my daughter Bella." Cassidy crouched slightly to meet Bella's curious gaze. "Hi there, sweetheart. You've got a brave dad." Bella's cheeks flushed with shy pride. Behind Cassidy, the riders continued to arrive, engines humming like a living choir, the cold air filled with the scent of leather and gasoline. Yet the atmosphere was anything but threatening. There was laughter, hugs, the clatter of kickstands. Someone began unloading boxes of fresh bread and fruit from a sidecar. Another carried jugs of hot coffee. Tara and Bree stepped forward, eyes bright with unshed tears. Friends from far-flung chapters clasped their shoulders, some whispering words of relief and solidarity. Bree hugged a fellow guitarist from Oregon she hadn't seen in years. Tara exchanged a silent, fierce embrace with an old road companion from Idaho. Caleb felt a lump rise in his throat. This was no random gathering. This was an answer, a living response to a single night of courage. By the time the sky blushed pink over the mountains, the lot was a festival of chrome and camaraderie. The bikers formed orderly lines to enter the roadhouse, greeting Caleb and Bella with warm handshakes and easy smiles. "Heard you held the line," one said. "We're here to hold it with you." Inside, the diner transformed from quiet refuge to vibrant meeting hall. Music drifted from a portable speaker as riders claimed booths, filled mugs with steaming coffee, and offered cash donations at the register without being asked. Someone fired up a portable grill outside to help with the overflow of hungry guests. Bella darted between tables, delight shining on her face. That they came from everywhere, she whispered, as if describing a miracle. Caleb could only nod, overwhelmed by the sheer scale of kindness. Every handshake carried unspoken gratitude. Every smile affirmed the same message. No one stands alone when decency is threatened. Cassidy caught his eye and motioned toward the door. "Caleb, step outside with me a minute." He followed her into the cool morning air, where the last wave of riders was still parking. The rumble of engines continued like distant thunder rolling down the valley. "You should know," Cassidy said, crossing her arms, "this isn't just a social call. Word of what happened here, the harassment, the sign on your door spread fast. People were angry. We don't let intimidation stand. So we ride. Not for trouble. For protection. And for gratitude." Caleb absorbed her words in silence, the magnitude sinking in. "I only did what anyone should do." "Maybe," Cassidy replied, "but not everyone does it. You did. And because of that, 200 sisters left their beds before dawn to stand in your parking lot. That means something." For a long moment, they watched the sunrise paint the mountains in fire and gold. Caleb felt the truth of her words settle deep in his chest. This was the same brotherhood he had once known in the Marines, now reborn in leather and steel instead of camouflage. When he re-entered the diner, a spontaneous cheer greeted him. Bella ran to his side, eyes sparkling. Tara and Bree stood near the counter, hands clasped, faces alight with gratitude. "This is for you, Bree," said her voice thick with emotion. "All of this. For standing up when you didn't have to." Caleb looked around at the crowded booths, the shared laughter, the shining motorcycles outside, and felt a quiet awe. Last night he had feared the Roadhouse might not survive the week. Now it pulsed with life richer than it had been in years. The day was only beginning, but already Caleb sensed that the echoes of this morning would carry far beyond the valley. This wasn't merely a gathering of riders. It was a living testament that kindness once set in motion could thunder across miles and change everything it touched. And as more engines arrived from the far side of the pass, the copper roadhouse seemed to glow brighter, like a beacon, fueled by the very courage and generosity that had called these riders home. By the time full daylight spilled over the Bitterroot Mountains, the copper roadhouse no longer resembled the lonely diner Caleb Brooks had closed the night before. It had become something larger and almost mythic. Motorcycles, sleek cruisers, vintage Harleys, sport tourers glittering with chrome covered every inch of the main lot and overflowed into the vacant gravel field next door. Their polished tanks caught the morning sun until the whole place seemed to shimmer. Inside, the air vibrated with life. The hiss of the old coffee machine merged with the low rumble of conversation laughter and the gentle clatter of forks on plates. Everywhere Caleb looked, strangers were greeting one another like long-lost friends. He had begun the morning braced for chaos. Instead, he found a calm, generous order that moved like a well-trained unit. Riders lined up at the counter in tidy rows, passing cash to Tara and Bree, who handled receipts with quiet efficiency. Others busied themselves at the grills outside flipping pancakes and frying eggs they'd brought from nearby farms and roadside suppliers. Cassidy Hart, the Spokane chapter leader who had introduced herself at dawn, coordinated it all with the easy authority of a seasoned road captain. "Keep the aisles clear, ladies," she called, smiling as she adjusted the flow of arrivals. "Let's make sure the man of the hour can move in his own kitchen." Caleb chuckled as he carried a steaming pot of coffee from table to table. "I don't think I've ever been called that," he said. "You earned it," Cassidy replied with a wink. "This is your house, Marine. We're just making sure it stays strong." Near the front windows, Bella darted between booths like a joyful messenger. In one corner, she helped a silver-haired biker grandmother named Bonnie Tate stack plates. In another, she perched beside a young rider named Carmen, who taught her to fold paper napkins into perfect triangles. Each time Bella returned to Caleb's side, her cheeks glowed with excitement. "Dad, they came from everywhere," she whispered, barely containing her amazement. "Oregon, Idaho, Washington. Some even from Canada. They all know our names." Caleb crouched to meet her eyes. "That's because your kindness traveled faster than any motorcycle," he said quietly. "And theirs did too." A few of the town's early risers began to appear, drawn by the spectacle. Dave Miller parked his old pickup across the road and came in with a slow, respectful nod to the bikers. Mrs. Callahan and her husband followed, curiosity giving way to warm smiles as they were greeted like honored guests. At first, the locals hovered near the door, unsure where to stand, amid leather jackets and roaring engines. But the lady bikers were masters of welcome. Bonnie Tate waved Mrs. Callahan over to a booth, immediately asking about her favorite pie flavors. Carmen struck up a conversation with Dave about fly fishing spots along the Bitterroot River. The barriers of fear and stereotype softened with each easy laugh. By mid-morning, the Roadhouse had the feel of a neighborhood festival. Someone set a portable speaker on the counter, and a blues riff rolled through the room. Bree tuned her guitar and joined in her music, weaving into the lively hum. A rider with a soft Tennessee accent began clapping in rhythm. Soon, the entire diner echoed with the warm syncopation of hands and strings. Caleb moved among the tables with an ease that surprised even him. Yesterday, he'd worried that Copper Roadhouse might not survive the week. Today, it pulsed with enough life to fill a month. Every handshake carried a story: a nurse from Spokane who volunteered on disaster relief teams, a retired Air Force mechanic who'd crossed 3 states overnight, a mother and daughter duo who ran a literacy program and rode to raise funds. Each conversation deepened Caleb's sense of awe. These women weren't an outlaw gang. They were a network of quiet heroes bound together by the road and a fierce belief in mutual care. Near noon, Cassidy called for attention with a sharp clap. The music softened as 200 pairs of eyes turned toward her. "Family," she said, her voice rich and sure. "We came because one man and his little girl refused to let fear dictate who deserved a seat at their table. Caleb and Bella stood for what's right. Today, we stand for them." A cheer erupted, deep, rolling, and joyous. Bella's eyes widened as she looked up at her father. Caleb felt a flush rise in his cheeks, but stayed steady. "Thank you," he said, his voice carrying over the noise. "But remember, you brought this spirit. You made this day what it is." Cassidy stepped closer and lowered her voice so only Caleb could hear. "This isn't just a thank you ride. We mean to keep this place alive. The Roadhouse matters to us and to this whole valley. No one intimidates kindness on our watch." Outside, more riders were still arriving in small clusters, their engines adding fresh music to the air. A local food truck showed up unannounced, the owner declaring that lunch for the bikers was on the house. 2 teenagers from the high school hauled extra chairs from a nearby community center. It seemed as if the entire valley had begun to orbit around the Roadhouse's glowing heart. Through it all, Caleb noticed Captain Trent Mason. The county officer had parked his patrol car across the street and stood watching from behind dark sunglasses. His jaw was set, but the sheer size and peaceful discipline of the gathering seemed to pin him to the spot. Even from a distance, Caleb could see the conflict in the man's posture authority, confronted by a vision of community he hadn't expected. Later, as the sun arced toward afternoon, Mason finally crossed the road and stepped inside. The room fell momentarily quiet. Cassidy turned to face him, flanked by Tara and Bree. Caleb walked forward calmly, Bella close behind. Mason scanned the packed diner, his gaze lingering on the children who had come with their parents, on the older women sipping coffee beside tattooed riders, on the spontaneous music and open laughter. Slowly, he removed his sunglasses. "I came to see for myself," he said, his voice lower than usual. "This isn't what I expected." Cassidy's reply was gentle but unyielding. "People see leather and think they know who we are. You've seen today what we really stand for." Mason nodded once, almost imperceptibly. Without another word, he turned and left the doorbell, giving a soft jingle that felt more like an apology than a threat. As the afternoon waned, the celebration settled into a warm rhythm. Children from town played tag between parked motorcycles, while their parents swapped recipes with riders from 3 states away. Bree led a sing-along of classic road songs that filled the diner with harmonies. Tara helped Bella and Carmen hang a handmade sign near the counter, "Kindness rides here." Caleb stood for a long time at the threshold watching the scene. The copper sign above the diner glowed like a burnished sunset even in full daylight. Yesterday, he had wondered if the place could survive another season. Today, he felt something stronger than survival renewal. When Cassidy joined him at the doorway, her eyes tracked the happy chaos with quiet satisfaction. "This is only the beginning," she said. "We'll keep coming back, not just to eat, but to remind this valley what community looks like." Caleb nodded, his heart full. He thought of Claire, whose belief in everyday miracles had once kept him hopeful through dark deployments. He thought of the promise he had made to Bella to build a life anchored in decency. And he knew, standing there amid a sea of leather and light, that kindness had become its own force of nature. As the sun dipped toward evening, the engines began to settle into a low, contented purr, like the deep breathing of a giant resting after a long journey. The day was far from over, but Caleb understood that something permanent had already taken root, a bond forged not in uniform or oath, but in shared humanity. And for the first time in months, the future of Copper Roadhouse felt as bright as the endless sky arching over the mountains. By late afternoon, the Copper Roadhouse pulsed with a quiet, jubilant rhythm that felt both celebratory and strangely sacred. The scent of grilled corn and smoked brisket wafted from the outdoor grills, mixing with the sweet tang of Bella's apple pies, cooling by the window. Every table inside and out was full. Conversation blended into a warm human music, voices of truckers, farmers, retired teachers, and hundreds of leather-clad women who now felt less like visitors and more like neighbors. Caleb Brooks moved among the tables with a steady smile, refilling mugs and exchanging handshakes. More than once he caught someone saying, "Thank you for standing your ground," words that carried a weight far beyond hospitality. Yet for all the gratitude showered on him, Caleb remained modest, even slightly shy, as if unsure how to stand in the center of so much admiration. Near the counter, Tara and Bree Knox greeted a pair of riders from Boise who had just arrived, their laughter ringing like bells. They looked almost transformed from the weary women he'd met 2 nights ago, faces brighter, shoulders unburdened. Every so often, Tara glanced at her phone, still hoping for news of their missing brother. Around 3 o'clock, Cassidy Hart, the Spokane chapter leader, tapped a spoon on a glass to call for attention. The chatter softened to a curious hush. "Family," she said, her voice carrying the easy authority of a seasoned road captain. "We came because 2 sisters we love, Tara and Bree, found themselves in a storm. And a Marine named Caleb Brooks opened his door, fed them, and faced down anyone who tried to make them feel small. Today we celebrate that courage." A cheer erupted deep and rolling. Bella clapped her small hands with delight, eyes shining as she looked up at her father. Cassidy went on her tone, more intimate. "But there's more to this story than standing up to a badge. There's the story of 2 sisters who ride not for rebellion, but for love of family and the open road. Tara, Bree, would you share what brought you here?" Tara and Bree exchanged a glance. After a pause, Tara rose. The room quieted again. She rested both hands on the back of her chair, her dark braid gleaming under the warm lights. "We started this ride because of our younger brother, Tyler." She began, her voice steady, but thick with feeling. "He went missing after a mountain storm. We've spent days chasing dead ends and cold trails. But that's only part of why this ride matters. We ride because our family taught us never to leave anyone behind, blood family or road family. When Captain Mason tried to reduce us to a patch on a jacket, Caleb reminded us, and maybe reminded all of you, that decency still has defenders." Her eyes swept the room, landing briefly on Mason himself. The county officer stood near the doorway, hat in hand, clearly unsure whether to stay or slip away. Bree rose beside her sister and added quietly, "Last night we felt lost on the road, and in our hearts. This morning we feel found. That's because kindness is contagious. Caleb, Bella, you didn't just give us food and shelter. You reminded us why we keep riding, to prove that compassion outpaces fear." For a long moment there was silence, not the awkward kind, but the reverent pause that comes when people feel something bigger than words. Then applause swelled until the wooden rafters trembled. Caleb felt heat rise in his face. He wasn't used to this kind of spotlight, and yet he recognized the deep truth in their words. This wasn't simply about shelter or coffee. It was about the decision to treat strangers as kin when no one would have faulted him for turning them away. When the clapping subsided, Tara turned toward Captain Mason. "Captain," she said evenly, "you came in with assumptions about who we are. Maybe today you see us differently." All eyes shifted to Mason. The tall officer shifted on his feet, his usual authority softened by the room's expectant quiet. He cleared his throat. He paused, then began again. quieter. I came here thinking I knew what I'd find. I was wrong. I see neighbors. I see veterans. I see family. I owe you an apology." The words hung in the air like a long-awaited rain. A murmur of surprise rippled through the crowd. Then a gentle applause rose, not raucous, but warm and forgiving. Caleb stepped forward, extending a hand. "Thank you for saying that, Captain. We all want the same thing, a safe town where people are treated fairly." Mason gripped his hand firmly. "You have that here, and I'll make sure no one else forgets it." The tension that had lingered for 2 days dissolved like morning mist. Conversations resumed with a new ease. Mason even accepted a slice of pie from Bella, who offered it with the disarming innocence that often succeeds where speeches fail. Outside, late-arriving riders continued to stream in their engines, adding a steady backbeat to the celebration. Children from town ran among the rows of bikes, marveling at the gleam of polished chrome. A group of older locals pulled lawn chairs onto the sidewalk, sipping coffee as they watched the gathering like a summer parade. At one point, Cassidy led a walk through the crowd to collect donations. Riders and townsfolk alike slipped cash into an old Marine helmet that Caleb kept near the register. By the time she set it back on the counter, it was overflowing, more than enough to pay for food deliveries, repairs to the aging furnace, and perhaps even the next month's mortgage. Bree found Caleb at the edge of the dining room as twilight crept in. "You've given us more than a roof," she said softly. "You've given us hope, and Tyler." She stopped, eyes bright with sudden tears. "I just got a text. He's alive, in a clinic north of Hamilton, banged up but safe." Caleb felt a rush of relief as pure and sudden as spring water. "That's the best news of the day," he said, and meant it. Tara joined them, her face breaking into an unguarded smile. "We'll ride to him tomorrow. But tonight, we stay to honor what's happening here." From across the room, Bella waved, calling Caleb to join a circle of riders teaching her a hand-clapping song. He excused himself and crossed the diner, heart swelling at the sight of his daughter, laughing in the middle of a circle of leather and denim. As evening settled, Cassidy once again called for attention. "Friends," she said, lifting a coffee cup like a toast, "what began with one Marine's quiet courage has become a family gathering none of us will forget. Let's remember, this compassion is the strongest engine on the road." A chorus of cheers answered warm enough to rival the fading sunlight. Outside, the last of the motorcycles glowed under strings of makeshift lights, a sea of steel and goodwill shimmering like a living constellation. Caleb stepped outside for a breath of the cool mountain air. The valley stretched before him, dusky and peaceful. Behind him, the Roadhouse radiated light and laughter, its copper sign reflecting the star-pricked sky. He thought of Claire, his late wife, and felt certain she would have loved this night, this proof that ordinary kindness could summon extraordinary strength. Inside, music started again, Bree's guitar joining a harmonica someone had pulled from a saddlebag. The melody floated into the evening like a benediction. Caleb lingered a moment longer on the porch, letting gratitude settle deep in his chest. What had begun as a small act of decency had become something far greater, a living testament that courage and compassion could change not only a single night, but an entire community's heart. And the echoes of that truth would ride far beyond these mountains, carried on every set of wheels that departed under the stars. The September night settled soft and cool around the copper Roadhouse, but the glow inside the diner only deepened. Strings of lights donated by a rider from Spokane, who carried them in her saddlebags, twinkled like tiny constellations across the porch. The smell of apple pie mingled with the smoky sweetness of grilled corn from the outdoor fire pits, and laughter floated out over the mountain valley like music. Caleb Brooks stepped onto the wooden porch for a moment of quiet. Above him, the Big Dipper shone bright and clear, and beyond the line of mountains, he could still hear the occasional rumble of late-arriving engines. 200 lady bikers had become a tide that refused to ebb. And now, as evening slid toward night, he felt the enormity of what had taken root here. Inside, Bella darted between tables, with tireless energy, balancing mugs of cocoa on a tray twice her size. She was every bit her mother's child, fearless and full of grace. Each time Caleb's gaze found her, a warmth rose in his chest that no cold wind could touch. At the center of the diner stood Cassidy Hart, the Spokane chapter leader, whose quiet command had turned an impromptu gathering into a seamless festival. She raised her voice above the soft strum of Bree's guitar. "Friends she called before the night ends, we have something to give back to this house that gave us welcome when we were strangers." The music hushed. All eyes turned toward Cassidy as she signaled to 2 riders near the door. They disappeared briefly and returned carrying a black leather vest stitched with copper thread. Across the back, in a perfect arch, the words gleamed, "Roadhouse Angels." Below it, in slightly smaller script, read, "Protected by the Sisterhood of the Road." Cassidy laid the vest on the counter with something like reverence. "Caleb Brooks," she said. "For standing your ground when it mattered most, for opening your heart to sisters, you didn't know we name you, and Copper Roadhouse honorary members of the Roadhouse Angels. From this day forward, anyone who rides under our banner rides also for you." The room erupted in cheers so loud the window panes quivered. Bella covered her mouth in delighted surprise, then ran to hug her father's waist. Caleb's throat tightened as he stepped forward. He placed a hand on the vest, feeling the fine stitching and the weight of the moment. "I don't have words," he said at last, his voice steady but thick. "I only did what anyone should. But you've turned one small act of decency into something I'll carry for the rest of my life. Thank you for showing my daughter and this town what family can look like." A ripple of applause swelled into another cheer. Caleb noticed Captain Trent Mason standing near the doorway again, no longer in uniform, but in a flannel shirt. The stiffness in his shoulders eased. He gave a small nod of respect that felt like a quiet surrender. Cassidy smiled. "We don't give this lightly," she said. "This vest means that Copper Roadhouse is on our map, literally. We'll make it a regular stop on our cross-country routes. Anyone who dares to harass you harasses us all, and we don't let that stand." The statement landed with the certainty of a pledge. Around the room, riders raised their mugs in a wordless toast. Even some of the locals joined. Their initial skepticism dissolved into admiration. Outside, the celebration continued under the stars. Riders rolled out portable grills and turned the gravel lot into an open-air kitchen. Someone set up a small stage from 2 truck beds. Bree led a chorus of old road songs, while a harmonica player from Boise wove notes of smoky gold through the melody. Children from town joined the dancing, their sneakers kicking up sparks of dust under the lights. Caleb stood on the porch for a long time, the leather vest folded over his arm. He watched Bella laugh with a circle of biker grandmothers who had adopted her for the evening, teaching her clapping games and secret road signs. He felt a deep, almost aching gratitude, an awareness that something rare and luminous was happening here, something his late wife, Claire, would have loved. Tara joined him, her dark braid catching the light of the lanterns. "You know, she said we've been on the road for years. We've seen kindness in 100 forms. But what you did, welcoming us without hesitation, drawing that line with Mason, that's the kind of thing we talk about for decades." Caleb glanced at her, the mountain night reflected in her eyes. "I just couldn't stand by," he said simply. "That's exactly why it matters." Bree stepped out next, cradling her guitar. "Tyler's on the mend," she said softly. "We'll ride to see him tomorrow, but tonight, we're exactly where we need to be." Caleb nodded, feeling a quiet kinship settle between them. You'll tell him he's welcome here any time he said. Count on it, Bree replied, her smile warm and sure. As the evening deepened, Cassidy called once more for attention. The riders gathered around the porch steps, lanterns swinging gently in the cool breeze. Family, she began this night, proves a simple truth. Kindness is stronger than fear. Caleb and Bella opened their door, and we answered. From this day, the Copper Roadhouse is part of our story. We'll ride back season after season, not just to eat, but to keep this flame alive. A unified shout rose into the star-studded sky, echoing off the surrounding peaks. Some riders wiped tears from their cheeks, others embraced in long, wordless hugs. Inside the diner, Captain Mason finally approached. He looked different without his badge and belt, almost like a neighbor instead of an enforcer. "Mr. Brooks," he said quietly, "I misjudged you and these women. I came here thinking I was protecting the town. I see now I was just protecting an old prejudice. I'm sorry." Caleb extended a hand without hesitation. "Thank you, Captain. We all learn. That's what matters." The officer gripped his hand firmly. "If you ever need the department's support, you'll have it." He paused, glancing at the crowd of riders. "It seems you already have plenty of backup." They both smiled, an unspoken truce sealed. When the music resumed, Caleb returned to the counter and hung the black leather vest beside a framed photograph of Claire and a well-worn Marine flag. The copper lights shone on the new emblem until it looked almost like a badge of honor passed down through generations. Bella climbed onto a stool and leaned against him, her eyelids heavy, but her smile wide. "Daddy," she whispered, "Mom would love tonight." "She would," Caleb said, resting a hand on her small back. "She'd say kindness makes the best kind of noise." As midnight approached, riders began to settle into small groups around the fire pits, telling road stories and planning future visits. The roadhouse itself seemed to hum with a new life, as if the building understood that its place in the world had changed. No longer just a diner on a quiet highway, it was now a beacon for fellowship, a station on the vast map of road-borne loyalty. Caleb looked out over the sea of leather and liked the music threading through cool mountain air, and felt a profound certainty the Copper Roadhouse would endure. Not merely as a business, but as a living testament to the idea that a single act of courage can awaken a whole community of guardians. Somewhere above the stars burned bright and unwavering, as if to witness the vow being written in the hearts of everyone gathered. Kindness rides farther than fear, and it never rides alone. The mountains awoke in quiet splendor, their peaks crowned with a first hint of autumn snow. Golden light rolled across the valley, catching the mist that clung to the pines and washing the Copper Roadhouse in a radiant glow. Inside, the air was thick with the aroma of coffee wood smoke, and something deeper, a sense of triumph that no one wanted to end. Caleb Brooks stirred from a light sleep in his small upstairs room. He had barely closed his eyes, but his heart was full. The images of last night shimmered in his memory. Hundreds of women, riders singing under the stars, Captain Mason offering a humble apology, Bella laughing in a ring of biker grandmothers, and that black leather vest, Roadhouse angels gleaming like a medal of honor beside the Marine flag. Downstairs, the familiar sounds of life returned, the low rumble of friendly voices, the gentle clink of mugs. He descended the stairs and paused halfway, taking in the sight that unfolded below. The roadhouse, once threatened with silence, now overflowed with fellowship. Riders from every corner of the Northwest were already stirring brewing coffee on camp stoves outside, helping sweep the porch, exchanging hugs as they prepared for the long rides home. Copper light from the morning sun fell across their leather jackets, turning each back patch into a living emblem of solidarity. Bella spotted him first. "Dad," she called, her small voice cutting through the cheerful noise. She raced to the stairs and hugged him fiercely. "You should see outside, it looks like another parade." Caleb crouched to her level, brushing a stray lock of hair from her forehead. "I believe it," he said with a smile. "Your friends know how to make a farewell beautiful." Together, they stepped outside. The sight took his breath. Rows upon rows of motorcycles glittered with dew, their chrome winking in the new sunlight. Women embraced like sisters after a long journey, promising to meet again on different highways. The air carried the deep, steady pulse of idling engines and the warm scent of brewed coffee drifting from countless thermoses. Cassidy Hart Spokane's chapter leader approached with a clipboard and an easy grin. "Good morning, Marine," she said. "We're starting to roll out in waves, but don't think for a second this is goodbye." Caleb shook her hand warmly. "You've already given us more than we can ever repay." Cassidy's eyes softened. "Kindness isn't a debt, Caleb. It's a chain reaction. You lit a spark here, and it'll keep burning on every road we ride." Nearby, Tara and Bree Knox hugged fellow riders who had traveled through the night to stand with them. Their faces shone with a peace Caleb hadn't seen before. Bree's phone buzzed again, a video call from their younger brother Tyler, who smiled weakly from a hospital bed, waving a bandaged hand. The sisters held the screen so Caleb and Bella could wave back. "Doctors say he'll be discharged in a week," Tyler said, his voice hoarse but strong. "I can't thank you enough for helping my sisters." Caleb felt a lump rise in his throat. "Just glad they and you are safe," he said simply. After the call ended, Tara turned to Caleb, emotion deep in her eyes. "You gave us a home when we felt we had none. We'll never forget that." Before Caleb could answer, a gentle jingle of the door announced another arrival. To his surprise, Captain Trent Mason stepped inside. Today he wore no uniform, just a plain jacket, and the careful expression of a man intent on making things right. He approached Caleb with measured steps and extended a hand. "Mr. Brooks," he said, "I came to thank you again. Yesterday I thought I was protecting the town. I see now you were the one protecting what this town should stand for." Caleb accepted the handshake. "It takes courage to admit that, Captain." "Thank you." Mason's gaze swept over the bustling diner, the laughter, the mix of locals and riders enjoying breakfast together. "This changes things," he admitted. "I've already spoken with the sheriff. We're revising some policies about profiling, and I'll be the first to stand up if anyone tries to intimidate you again." Something in Caleb's chest eased. "That means a lot," he said quietly. When Mason left, a small group of local farmers entered carrying baskets of produce, fresh apples, winter squash, herbs. Mrs. Callahan placed a hand on Caleb's arm. "Consider this a thank you," she said with a smile. "You reminded all of us how to be neighbors." The morning unfolded as a farewell festival. Bree played her guitar one last time, leading everyone in a road song that blended harmonica and laughter. Riders hugged Bella and tucked small souvenirs, pins, patches, shiny beads into her pockets. "For your courage," they said, "and your pies." Cassidy approached again just before the first group mounted their bikes. She held a sealed envelope. "This is from all of us," she said. "No argument, Caleb. It's for repairs supplies, whatever keeps this beacon burning." Caleb started to protest, but Cassidy shook her head. "Accept it as fuel for the road ahead. That's how family works." He finally took the envelope, feeling its reassuring weight. "Thank you," he said simply, "for everything." Engines began to ignite one by one, each roar a heartbeat in the crisp morning air. Bella clapped her hands over her ears and laughed as the chorus grew. Cassidy swung a leg over her bike, raised 2 fingers in a rider's salute, and shouted, "Roadhouse Angels, roll out." The response was instantaneous. 200 riders echoed the call and began their slow, orchestrated departure. Chrome flashed in the sun as columns of motorcycles streamed onto the highway, their sound rising like an anthem that rolled across the valley and into the mountains beyond. Caleb and Bella stood on the porch, waving until the last glimmer of taillights vanished around the bend. For a long time afterward, only the quiet hiss of the cooling highway remained, like the memory of a mighty wave after it recedes. Inside the roadhouse felt different, not emptier, but expanded, as if the walls themselves had absorbed the day's courage and fellowship. The black leather vest still hung beside the Marine flag, and Claire's photo gleaming in the morning light. It looked less like a decoration, and more like a promise fulfilled. Bella slipped her hand into her father's. "Daddy," she said softly, "do you think Mom saw all of this?" Caleb's gaze lingered on Claire's smiling face in the frame. "I believe she did," he said. "And I think she's proud." He lifted Bella into his arms and turned a slow circle, taking in the room that had once seemed on the edge of closure. The copper tables shone as if newly polished. The air still carried the laughter of 1,000 kind words. And on the counter sat a day's receipts and the generous envelope more than enough to cover Bill's repairs and a fresh start. For Caleb, the meaning ran deeper than finances. This day had proven something he'd longed to believe, but hadn't dared to trust. Kindness is stronger than fear, and courage invites its own community. As father and daughter stood in the soft morning light, Caleb felt the quiet certainty of a new chapter beginning. Copper Roadhouse was no longer just a diner on a lonely Montana highway. It had become a beacon on the map of human decency, a living testament to what happens when one person chooses to do what is right, no matter the cost. Outside, the mountains held the echo of departing engines like a blessing, and within those sturdy copper walls, Caleb Brooks knew that the spirit born here of friendship, courage, and boundless kindness would ride on, mile after mile, lighting roads he might never see, but helping others find their way home. Before you head off, we'd love to hear from you. Where in the world are you watching from, and what part of this story touched your heart the most? Share a few words in the comments. We truly enjoy reading every single one. If this story lifted your spirit, please subscribe to Soul Moments Story so you won't miss the next journey of kindness and hope. Your support helps us keep bringing these uplifting tales to life. From all of us here, thank you for spending your time with us today. Your presence means more than you know, and we can't wait to meet you again in the next story.